American Manganese. It's about a $150 million Canadian battery metals company who's currently working on a battery recycling technology that will pretty much be the topic of this video. But it's also important for you to know that this video is strictly informational and it's also general in nature. It is not personalized in any way whatsoever, and it just does not constitute any financial advice. I guess that speaks for itself, but I want you to know that. But if you do treat this video as financial advice, you're probably going to lose your money. You're also obligated to pause the video right now. There's a full disclaimer on your screen, and read it before you continue. So yeah, Zarko, with all that said, thank you for investing your time in me, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, the pleasure is all mine, of course. I love talking to people about new technologies and all that type of things. And I want to get right into learning more about the whole market that you're targeting. But before we do that, you're going to have to sort of help me understand the company that you're involved in right now. You're going to have to help me understand what is American Manganese, because I'm going to do sort of 30,000 foot view of what I've seen. You basically have a bunch of exploration projects where you're looking for precious and battery metals, but then you're also developing this technology, Recyclico, you call it, if I'm not mistaken, that aims at recycling lithium ion batteries. But in the same time, your team isn't huge to do all that. That's sort of the 30,000 foot view. That's what someone would see if they go to your MD&A or something like that, or to your website. And I'm already kind of overwhelmed of all that's going on, and I'm not sure what exactly is happening over there. So take a minute and explain that to me, please.
Yeah, so there's some corrections there. I mean, we, American Manganese, I think the confusion already starts from the name. Our history does come from a history in mining. Our CEO has a long history in mining.
And, you think you're going to change the name? Sorry to interrupt you already, but you think you're eventually going to change the name?
Yeah, so we had proposed actually for our upcoming AGM that looking for a name change to represent more the recycling. So recyclable battery materials. Really, the whole focus on the company, or really major focus, is on the recycling. The technology really comes from our history in mining, where we have patents on recovering electrolytic manganese metal from low grade ores. And that was work done on a project in Arizona called Artillery Peak. This project has a long history. I mean, in the US, you're 100% import dependent on manganese, and you need manganese for steel, and especially during those war times, that Artillery Peak project was a really critical one. And when we picked that up, we found more efficient ways of extracting those materials, and really from there, we worked on that project. We got patents. We got patents for that. And when I mean work on that, we got up as far as a pre-feasibility study before the prices of manganese really dropped off, and then that project was shelved. So that's really the history of the company, and it kind of represents in the name. But really, we're on the new forefront now. Since 2016, that know-how and patent technology on the manganese side had some parallels to material found in lithium-ion batteries, and that's really where we started making a pivot to working on recycling lithium-ion battery materials, where we did show up to 100% extraction of lithium, nickel, manganese, and cobalt from different cathode materials and in different lithium-ion battery chemistries. And then since that project, we've scaled from the initial theoretical work, the lab scale work, pilot work, and now the big milestone for us is this demonstration plant work we have going on now.
Okay, fair enough. And is it fair to say that lithium specifically is going to be the main focus going forward? Targeting, you're going to be recycling these batteries, but it's going to be lithium recovery that you're going to be after first.
I mean, that's the whole suite of metals really that you can get from the lithium-ion batteries. I think, just as noted in the name, lithium is that kind of common denominator that's in there. Ironically enough, you see a lot of the traditional recycling technologies are like high heat smelters don't actually recover the lithium. I mean, it just burns it off into slag. This very, very poor efficiency on lithium recovery. Right now, you're seeing a lot of just nickel and cobalt focus, but we're getting lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt in there as well. So yeah, no, lithium. Lithium is one of those ones that is critical as well. And like right now, you're seeing how big of a disconnect there is from the demand to what the potential supply is in lithium. But nickel, cobalt, manganese, all very important as well.
Okay, that's interesting because well, I guess we're going to touch upon that too, but you're seeing some companies moving from NMC batteries, nickel, manganese, I guess, cobalt, to LFP batteries. And I have a personal example of my experience with an LFP battery, but I guess we're going to talk about it later down in this interview. I do have a few unknowns around that whole battery sector for myself. I don't think I understand it fully. That I want to talk about before we go more in depth on those metals separately. So maybe you can give me an overview, if that's even possible, of the supply of like. Let's maybe focus on lithium because as you said, that's the common denominator. Because NMC batteries need lithium, if I understand it correctly, but LFP batteries need that too, and pretty much all the viable options right now involve lithium. So maybe we can talk about the supply and demand of the lithium side, and maybe you can also use the minute to explain to me why it's even worth putting millions of dollars into the development of a recycling technology. So yeah, I guess let's start off simply. Let's cover the supply side first, and we'll move to demand more after that. Where do these metals come from in terms of countries and companies? Who's mining it? Where are they getting it from?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm interested to hear your take on the LFP as well, but we'll get to that. So lithium can come from different kinds of deposits, right? Like let's say in South America right now, you're getting it from these brine deposits. Essentially, you've probably seen them, the big evaporation ponds, and that's really built from just millions of years of in high elevation, hot temperatures, and that's really the geology in that area. And so it's the lithium brine deposits are one way to extract lithium, and that's where you see a major amount coming from as well. But then in Australia, you'll commonly find hard rock, or called spodumene, and that's in a different form of extracting those materials and different processing and refining afterwards. But really, the end product that can go into a battery, and that really depends on the chemistries, like you're mentioning, NMC, NCA, LFP. The type of lithium that would be needed is you're looking at a lithium carbonate or lithium hydroxide. So those have their different prices in the market. So I mean, we can get into those details as well, but just so your listeners know, there's a demand for lithium carbonate and lithium hydroxide, and how you come to those end products have different processing steps. Some have additional costs, and it all really changes depending on what kind of deposit you have as well. But for example, if we look at the Australian supply chain right now, I mean, there's no refining of those materials, right? You take the rocks, you'll reduce those down, smaller rocks, and then that will get shipped to China, where it's further refined into these lithium chemicals that would be used then into further battery production or battery component production.
So the supply is not as straightforward as a supply of gold or silver or tin or something else.
No, I mean, you're going into very specialized chemicals now, right? That require very high purities. We've seen some of those cases in headline news where batteries, I'm not saying this has always come from the impurities, but there was battery fires, recalls on batteries. The batteries are very specific, and if you're going to start, they need to go through very strict quality control, and it's important to get that right. And the buyers of these materials, like the battery manufacturers or cathode manufacturers, are buying these lithium. Are very have a very specific impurity levels, what that material needs to look like. They need to qualify all of that, essentially.
Mm, so stuff like above ground inventories, like you have with copper or uranium, is that a thing in the lithium market? Does anybody track it?
Right now, I don't know how much you'd be possibly able to stockpile. I feel like everything plus 5 times more would be needed to fill in these demand gaps, the supply and demand gaps.
Is that happening right now? Like, do we have demand gaps right now, or is that something you're expecting?
Well, yeah, I mean, you see the price of lithium in the past year has gone up over 400%. I mean, there's so much demand. I think we're seeing a lot throughout Europe, North America, a lot of companies announcing big battery gigafactory plants, and then EV companies also announcing that they're going to make so many electric vehicles. But then the underlying question is, who's supplying you the material? And if you have the purchasing power of established companies like Tesla now, or other majors who are looking to get into the mining themselves and able to secure their supply, I think more companies will need to do the math on how much is actually available out there right now, and how they're going to meet their projections.
Is huh? But is it the same as like with rare earth elements where you'd find them in many places, but it's difficult. Like they have challenging metallurgy, but then there's also pretty much only one place on Earth that you can take separate them viably, economically viable, and that's China. Is there something like that in the lithium market? Like, does the lithium market depend on China largely, or on a different country, or something like that?
Uh, so the whole lithium ion battery supply chain heavily depends on China for the processing and refining of the materials. Um, but I would say there's a lot of lithium out there, but now it's just developing these projects, right?
Mm.
It doesn't happen overnight, 5, 10 years in terms, but then you're dealing with permitting issues, right? We're seeing with Rio Tinto in Serbia, it's a big deposit, but not, there's protests that they have to deal with. Um, it takes time. We're even seeing in the US right now large lithium deposits that are being disputed over environmental concerns. So now it's kind of, how is the government going to play those cards? Like, we need lithium for this electrification transition, but now it's also at the cost of maybe some local groups in those specific areas, right?
Mm.
How do you justify some of those? So there is a lot, but now it's just the development of those, the permitting, the construction. It's going to take some time.
Are most of those deposits mined open pit?
Well, it's so depending on kind of where you are. Like I mentioned, there's like brine deposits, spodumene deposits. The U.S. has some clay deposits, so those all have different techniques and how it's mined. But either so, I mean, just maybe to go back to the question as well on China, these materials then are still to get into the final form of like a battery, or to get into those more specialized materials, end up being shipped to China for further refining. And then that's really where they have a control on the processing of these materials. And not just lithium, you can see it in cobalt, where although the Democratic Republic of Congo has over 60% of the cobalt, it's still, being, even more higher percentage of that still being, shipped to China and being processed and refined in China. So those are some of the in the other metals as well.
Mm. What are some of the timelines on the supply? I'll tell you why I'm focusing on the supply cycle, I guess, of lithium in a second. But what are some of the timelines? Like, how long does it take from, say, that a company, exploration company confirms that they discover lithium? How long does it take for them to go from that to delivering lithium to battery producers? What's the time span there?
It's kind of like that rule of thumb where it says it could be 5 to 10 years. I mean, it really depends on your jurisdiction. I think, the instance in Serbia, Rio Tinto has been working on that and known about that for many years. Right now in the US as well, I think there's projects that could have already been on their way to developing a plant, but still dealing with permitting issues. So if everything goes smoothly, maybe you're at 5 years, but then dealing with permitting over many years and government support, government not supporting you, that all changes.
Well, why I'm focusing on the supply side of the story is because I guess it's not easy to foresee, but it's a bit less of a guesswork. Maybe like if we know how much supply there is and how much above ground inventory there is, we know we have a guess of how long it takes a company to go from on paper exploration to production. So we can, I guess it's higher probability of, I guess it has a higher probability of you being right. Now, foreseeing the demand though is where I see more risk. So I like focusing more on stories that have a supply, some type of a supply restriction. Like for example, it is with uranium, where the price of uranium is lower than what it takes to profitably produce uranium. And the demand side on uranium is also rather clear. That's why it's such a good opportunity, in my opinion. But anyways, the demand side, maybe I can tell you that story of my experience with the LFP battery, and why I think like that about and where my question comes in about the demand side of the story. I bought a Tesla Model 3 on a 0% interest rate loan in 2022, the end of 2022. It was in December, and I bought it on my company's name, so that's why it was basically a free loan. It was free money. So anyways, long story short, my decision-making process wasn't great behind it either. But first of all, I had to wait for it. I had to wait for it months to get it. That's not great, but it's not a big issue, right? But the worst part was I guess my $9,000 loss that I occurred after selling the car just over a week after I took delivery of it. My specific model was the one with the LFP batteries. So that would be, what is that? Lithium iron phosphate, I guess, battery.
Yeah.
So right. That's that. And that what people in the US are driving are the NMC batteries, I imagine, because the LFP batteries for Tesla came out of China, but most of them still have NMC. But they're anyways. Regardless, to me, my personal example, have very bad range and extremely long charging times. For example, I would sit at superchargers, that'd be V2 superchargers, for over 3 hours. And I even couldn't get the car to charge past 92%. It might have been a software mistake or whatever, but it was still a long time to charge. And then it almost never, it almost never got more than 100 miles out of a full charge, which is, I'm not an extremely aggressive driver. Maybe I drive a bit faster than most people, just a bit, but I'm not really I'm not an aggressive driver. And that's all despite it being like positive degrees. And it never really gets cold over here in Belgium. It was December, but it was not like minus 15 or something. It was like 6, 7, 8, 10 degrees Celsius, that is. But so I was very disappointed with the technology. And it seemed like I always thought this thing is like, if we want to electrify our transport, maybe we're going to have to start thinking about some type of another solution with maybe better properties. And from what I found, again, no expert here. Okay. But this is solely my free time research, I guess, and some of my shower thoughts. So I'm probably wrong, and I'm hoping you can correct me. But so lithium batteries maybe just don't have the properties to offer us what we might want, that 1,000-mile range and that 15-minute charge and that million-mile lifespan of a battery. So I guess to sort of wrap it up in a question here, how much of a risk do you think the current demand figure that we might have, we're expecting to have a demand for X pounds of lithium or whatever, how much risk do you think that demand figure has if we bring into account the potential for technological disruption? Like, for example, I don't know, I might talk about that later on, but like graphene batteries or another battery that can offer that 1,000-mile range with the 15-minute charge. How much of a risk do you think that really is?
So let's see. So first, I want to say, so it's NCA. So Tesla's using an NCA, or initially started using NCA, and it's a high nickel cathode, right? And then how we're talking about all the other materials. where nickel started to become a concern for Tesla because they're using so much nickel in those. So then they had to shift, okay, what are we going to do? Right? It's not going to be a one kind of battery fits all. It's going to be really demand applications. You have an LFP maybe for a lower range of vehicles, or like your lower tier, and then your high performance ones have like your high nickel, high cobalt. So you can change, like, how much range you possibly get from that as well, but it's also how much the consumer is willing to pay for it, right? So they've actually started using the LFP here in North America as well. I have one that's the original NCA. I don't think I would have bought the one with the LFP, just maybe my own bias against it. And that from your experience as well. And so that kind of softens their demand for nickel that they'll need, right? They can maybe sell the lower range Model 3s with LFP. But so let me just collect my thoughts here. So there's the LFP as well starting to be used here, and from a recycling standpoint, I see this now as, okay, it's the LFP, you have more abundant materials, but it's maybe cheaper to manufacture as well. But then on the recycler is really kind of the last guy that's being thought of here. And now what value is there to recycle? You just have the lithium, versus before you have the lithium, nickel, manganese, and cobalt were all very valuable. Economics were, look great. But now the LFP, the iron phosphate, not really a high value product that you'd be focusing on. And maybe with the current rising lithium prices, maybe there is some purpose as well of recovering that lithium and making it economical. But now, okay, it's for the EV manufacturer. It lower battery costs to make the battery, but then at the end of the day, when they need to deal with the battery, how is that going to look on the recycling standpoint? You're going to have to pretty much pay the difference of what you just saved from not using NCA to LFP now to recycle these batteries. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's you have a savings up front, but now you have a cost at the back because you have to put in more to recycle that. You're not getting all the value out, versus recycling like an NMC or an NCA battery. You're recovering nickel and cobalt, right? So that's adding value to your recycled product that can be cycled back as well. So that's just one comment I have on that. And then the LFP, although they say they still quote the same amount of range.
No, they actually. So I'm sorry, I'm being interruptive. I hate being that, but they sold me onto it, saying that it actually had longer range. They claimed it had 480 kilometers. Was that 250 miles? Not good at this, but
I'm in kilometers too, though.
Okay, yeah. So 480 kilometers is what they claimed. Like, no way. I could never get out 200 kilometers out of it. Like, never. Doesn't matter how I drive it. They told me don't turn on your heated seats. I wasn't even turning them on because it was just not needed, but don't use your navigation. But at the same time, they said you have to preheat the battery before you go to the supercharger. So do use your navigation so that your battery can start preheating. It was very confusing to me. And I just started questioning these batteries. Can we make that battery that is really going to turn the whole world over to this electrical thing, or is there forever going to be limitations so long as we stick to these lithium batteries? And that sort of was where my question came in terms of, what if we eventually drop lithium and all these other metals that you're hoping to recycle? What if we eventually drop all of these metals and go towards a completely different battery, like for example that graphene battery?
Sorry, I know it's a long-winded way to getting to that point, but these next generation batteries, there's a big hype curves that happen where you have, we're taking this out. Like a lot of them, whether lithium air, lithium sulfur, they still have lithium in them. You have like the sodium ones that that kind of what application there's different performance for different demands, and just taking out lithium or taking out these other ones is not going to still give you the same performance, right? Like we don't even use the same chemistries in our power tools or our cell phones or laptops. Everything has a different demand application, and you have batteries that work for that. Now, when we talk about, you have in energy storage, you have some will use, there's development of the iron batteries, or the vanadium redox flow batteries, right? No lithium there. But is that the same? Is that a reasonable or practical application in an electric vehicle, right? Because they have two totally different uses. An electric vehicle, you need high performance, long sustained performance, charge maybe once a day, twice a day, versus energy storage. It's, multiple charge discharge cycles. It's long sustained power and needs to hold it for very long, right? So there's that. But then when we talk about these next generation batteries, we have to look at like what's really changing. Like you mentioned, like graphene. So I haven't heard too much there, and skeptical of some graphene applications. But when we look at the cathode and the anode of a battery, the cathode is this like aluminum foil that has lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt, like let's say in an NMC battery. That's the coating on the cathode. Then you have a separator in between. And then on the other side, you have an anode. And the anode's like a copper foil with graphite. And then you have this like liquid electrolyte fill. Now, the changes in batteries can happen in that cathode, where we're seeing from NMC to NCA to LFP. That's the composition on the cathode side. So you either have iron phosphate on the cathode, you have NCA, like nickel, cobalt, aluminum, or nickel, manganese, cobalt, NMC. But then on the anode side, you're seeing some changes in the like silicon doping of the anode. So mixing some silicon with the graphite material to help with those, fast charge times and more power. But then as well, you're seeing some changes completely to the anode called like solid state, where it's like a lithium metal, right? And then that electrolyte fill is changed as well, but nothing actually changes to the cathode side. So it's not taking away lithium, it's not taking away nickel or cobalt, right? You're making changes to the anode side, or you're making changes to the electrolyte, or you're making or you're making a complete complete change to cathode, anode. But how those are still so many years away from being built to the scale and the capital investment that's already made in existing projects. Like we've been able to reduce the cost of a lithium ion battery manufacturing from $1,000 a kilowatt hour to $100 a kilowatt hour, or just around there, right? I mean, so now you get a new generation battery, and now it costs you more. You're going through the learning curve. You still need to scale it. Meanwhile, these more adopted technologies are enjoying the economies of scale that's been poured into them. So, prices may get to a point where it's no longer profitable, and you need to change things up. I think everything has a different application demand.
I wish I could remember who told me what I'm about to say here to give them credit for, because it sounds smart. And if I don't want to make it seem as if I came up with it, because I'm not that smart, but somebody told me to look for investments that in the natural resource space specifically that have a broken supply chain, where the supply chain is just not functioning properly. A supply chain that is maybe not going to be able to meet demand, or supply chain that is not going to be able to meet anything, even the current demand, even though growth. So a broken supply chain and undeniable demand fundamentals. Now, I keep going back to uranium because that's my highest conviction. I hope you don't mind me using it as an example. But you have that there. We have that broken supply chain. We have an undeniable demand where 20% of the world electricity is generated because of uranium. Can't go without it. No way around it. That's sort of how I understand it. If that's true or not is a completely different discussion. I do suspect it is true. But just to sort of summarize what you've said already, is that the case for these battery metals? Like, do we have that broken supply chain? And do we have an undeniable forward demand. That's sort of what I was trying to test here with giving you these examples of, okay, these batteries, what if we change them? Are we still going to have demand? So what do you think? Is the supply chain broken, and do we have undeniable demand?
Yeah, I mean, we'll start from the top. You have, you know, governments all over the world legislating for more electric vehicle adoption, electrification of everything, right? So start there. And now you have major automotive companies transitioning their fleets to electric and quoting numbers. Actually, maybe even before that, now you have cities and countries saying no more internal combustion engine sales by 2030, 2035, 2040, whatever it is. So the standard's really set now. And then you have the automotive companies transitioning all their fleets over, you know, Volkswagen. I see Toyota as well announcing like 30 new EV cars, Hyundai, Tesla, you know, pouring billions of dollars into it. Ford, GM here in North America as well. And now, okay, now how are we going to meet that demand? Now we need to make the batteries. And now you have big announcements happening throughout Europe, North America, but majority is concentrated in China right now in terms of cell production, right? So you need to make these cells, but now to get the components for those cells, like what I was talking about, like the cathode, the anode, the separator, electrolyte, that's concentrated now in China, Korea, Japan, you know, that region of the world where that industry was invested in a decade ago or more, to build up that industry. And now, okay, now to build those components, you need the raw materials. And now the raw materials, like we started off this conversation, are coming from Africa, South America, you know, everywhere, essentially. I mean, the materials are scattered all over, whether it's lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt. And now, yeah, that's broken as well, because now, okay, everything has just been, the standard's been set when nobody did the math at the bottom. And like, how are you going to get all these materials? And now you're trying to transition to other chemistries. But now these chemistries, you know, are not, you know, they're not now more modern. You know, you're trying to transition major things into new chemistries that don't happen overnight. You know, it's very especially for an automotive company to qualify certain cells for their electric vehicles at the volume they need. So much work needs to go into testing these cells and, you know, ensuring their performance, testing these different chemistries. Is it consistent? And then building up the infrastructure to build it with that chemistry. That all takes time. So I think at every single point there is a gap or like a broken supply chain. And then this, you know, trying to transition and move quickly into new chemistries is becoming a challenge. I'm confident in the world. I'm optimistic about it, but it is going to be difficult when the standards are set at the top first.
You're making sense to me, at least. And maybe you're going to see that throughout this interview, but I'll try and as much as possible, as much as I can, which is probably not a lot, I'll try to push back on what you're saying so that I know what you're saying is solid, and to help me potentially build my own conviction in this thesis. So, you know, I'm not acting as if I know everything and have a counter argument, because I really don't. But I just don't know the market well enough to do that. But I'm just trying to potentially look for some places where the whole thesis could break. And I might bring up Rick Rule a few times, because he's the guy who I learned the most from. And he tells me that one of his most cliche things, that is cliche just because it's so true, is that the cure for high prices is high prices, is what he says. Meaning, once prices start getting really, really high, stuff like additional demand might swamp the market. Now you're telling me that's going to be a challenge, but something else that might happen is substitution might occur. So the fact that lithium prices are as high as they are today is, to your point, over 400, I believe even over 450% up year over year. Combined with that, they're up year over year. So combine, you know, how much and how quickly they got there, I would actually expect that to be maybe even a negative thing, because it can cause them to be substituted by What else do I know? Like sodium sulfur batteries. That's a thing, right? So salt
Sodium ion.
basically. Yeah.
Sodium ion.
Yeah, you're right. So is that a thing? Like, can substitution occur by that type of batteries that are already working, or how do you see that?
Well, I mean, there's also, like I mentioned, there's all sorts of different kind of battery chemistries being tested and announced, and at whether they're a lab scale or there's a few cells that are made, or you even see some solid state companies. But to build it at the scale that batteries are being built now, it's going to take time, and we're going to need to get the supply right now for what we need. Even with the high lithium prices, I would say one thing: it's not like the companies are paying those prices now. Those are spot prices. Most of these companies have long-term contracts on set prices, so you're really seeing only like a fraction of the industry paying what's announced. You can even see it with the earnings reports from some of the lithium producers, where they're expected to have such high earnings because the prices are up, but it's like, no, they've already secured their offtake with set prices, right?
Mm.
It's not as high as what analysts may have projected. So substitution is on people's minds, but right now, that I think in the lithium ion battery industry and how specialized that is, and the qualification process, I think that takes longer than what would be seen in maybe some historical situations where prices got high and then a metal was swapped out for another metal. But now we're talking about chemical performance as well, and a lot of different specific energies, density, the lifetime of the batteries. Sodium ion I've seen as well, but I don't think it holds the same capacity. It's kind of out of my area now. I haven't looked too much into it, but it caught the hype in news. There's a new battery, doesn't need lithium. It's a good story because lithium supply is really short. There's you can get a lot of those other materials, but then you now have to build major gigafactories. They're going to take billions of dollars as well, willing to adopt a technology for the first time. So you're building a new gigafactory, and a lot of them are coming up now for the very first time, pouring $1 billion in plus to commit to a technology that hasn't been tested on mass scale. That's a big ask for some companies, and I think a very big risk as well.
Okay, is that all that you're mentioning here? Is that only lithium? Because from what I'm hearing, and I'm way out of my depth here, so I'm trying to follow up. It's not as easy, but from what I'm hearing is that you do need lithium across the majority of these applications for batteries. Is this the thing that you see as like the thing that you see coming back is lithium? What about some of the other metals like cobalt, nickel, manganese, and all these other metals? Is their demand the same level of undeniable as the demand for lithium going forward?
Yeah, those ones you see fluctuate a little more, right? Like Tesla, in their batteries, they use like a high, initially we're using like a high nickel, like NCA. So nickel was really big for them as well. But then on their, I forget which one, maybe Battery Day announcement or one of their announcements, they mentioned, okay, like, there's potential for manganese in like lithium manganese batteries, for high manganese batteries, right? There's always talks on reducing cobalt out of batteries, so that's taken a hit, but still at producing millions of batteries now with low cobalt, you still need a lot of cobalt from these miners. So those fluctuate a little bit as well with applications. Like I see like high performance vehicles, I think is Volkswagen, who kind of outlined it, where they're saying they're low performance vehicles like LFP, they're high performance vehicles like high nickel, they're mid range like manganese. So that really is going to fluctuate. But to mention like what we're doing and what we're talking about in the supply, it doesn't need to be substitute. I think we need the mines now to get the material out there right now in this decade to grow that industry. and then really recycling comes in, and we can just keep all that material back in the loop. So it's not substituting and changing the technology, but maybe just having the highest recovery of these materials that have been mined, and being a major support for supply.
This is gonna be one of my questions coming up. Would be, maybe you can think about it already. Would be like, are you not shooting yourself in the foot by increasing supply through recycling? Because the more recycles come onto the market, the more supply there's going to be, basically, and then eventually that might, start killing off your margins, something like that. That's something that I intend on asking if it comes up. That's something that I was interested about. But before that, I also wanted to say, maybe now we can move on to the part of, okay, you're making the case for a broken supply chain. You think that the demand for these battery metals is probability for the demand staying high and actually growing is rather high. That's what you're saying. Okay, fair enough. How do I play this market? That would be my next question. And again, we'll get to talk about recycling here in a few minutes, because that's what you came to do here. But what do you think about the miners? Because you mentioned all these social tensions and inflation going up, meaning their costs are going up and stuff like that. But we're still going to have to take it out of the ground. And some people are still going to make money on this. So how do you look at the miners?
So I mean, you have the big players, right, currently, and there's a lot of the new technologies as well, junior miners, in development stages. I think you have to have a strong technical background as well to really differentiate between those, because all the deposits are not the same. The technologies vary depending on where you are, what kind of material you're dealing with. So it takes a good understanding and a lot of due diligence to understand kind of what has good grounds for growth. But I think there's going to be a lot of, just it's really, you have to. I'm not investment advice or anything, but I think it takes some like good due diligence. I don't think everybody will make it. I think some companies, you need to see if they have a strong team, strong balance sheet, just and growth from there, strong government support as well, which we're seeing a lot of as well. But it's hard to predict. I mean, for myself, being from Serbia, I follow, and I mentioned that Rio Tinto in Serbia lithium mine, and thinking with a company like Rio Tinto, one of the biggest, has done all their math and worked everything out, and has a great expertise, to be turned away, right? So it can be very unpredictable, and especially you see here in the US, there's some deposits that are kind of now back and forth in terms of some rare plant species that are being pushed back on the environmental groups, saying you'll wipe this out. Or there's some indigenous groups as well in the US. But on the other side, you have the president of the US pushing hard. We need a domestic supply. We need to electrify everything. Promoting Ford, promoting GM, but where are you going to get your lithium when internally in the country there's a conflict on whether this mine is going to happen? So very hard for me to see where it's going to go. But I think in the battery metal space, I don't think you can really go wrong. I think there is a big future for it. It's a case by case basis.
Case by case, yeah. Okay, that would make sense. I was also about to ask you what you think about the royalty companies, because they have a stronger business model, basically. And I really like the royalty business model. Maybe eventually in the future, when I become a serious investor, which is probably at least 10 years out in the future, I'll probably start getting more into royalties. But yeah, let's talk about the recycling companies. I guess I have two questions that you can answer sort of at once. Do you think that recycling companies offer a better value proposition than explorers, developers, miners, or royalties, or whatever else may have you in this space? And if you do think that, tell me what you think that value proposition is. Like, are recycling companies going to be building a business that they'll sell to a manufacturer or to like a Tesla entity or something or whatever? Or are they building a business that they're hoping, like specifically you maybe, that you're hoping to run for like the next 25 years, start cash flowing, start paying a dividend? So is there a better value proposition, and what is that value proposition?
Okay, so first I'll start saying, like, I do, just to finish off the mining side, like, do support that, and we do need mining, right? I think in the recycling side, there's just mining, you get a lot of headwinds. We need it, but mining has such a bad stigma to it, unfortunately, right? We want green energy, we want clean tech, but we don't want mining. And then I don't think there's a lot of understanding of that whole supply chain and how this works, right? So just finish off on that point. But then recycling, you have a lot of tailwinds. You have government support. You have, so much, like, there need legislation. There needs to be a certain X% of recycled content in new batteries. The see in Europe, you see a lot of focus in Asia on that as well. These materials cannot be landfilled. So you need to recycle them, essentially, right? Everything is pushing in that direction. By recycling them, you reduce your reliance on mined material because you're supplementing your own supply chain there now, and your feed material. And then there's just, the environmental support as well. Like, this is now looked as urban mining. It's clean. We're not digging holes in the ground. We're not, there's all of that. I don't think you'll get a lot of public pushback when you say you're building a recycling plant that's bringing materials back versus how it looks when you're building a mine, right? So a lot of support going for recycling. And then I think there's two different models that recycling companies are looking as like a value proposition, right? There's what I refer to as independent recyclers and integrated recyclers. So I see a lot of companies right now, independent recyclers, right? Establishing that independent facility that's going to take batteries from companies, waste batteries, scrap materials, and process that material, and then refine it into some kind of product that will be sold back into the supply chain, right? We look at ourselves more as a technology company that's integrated. So we look at the opportunities where you have battery manufacturers, EV OEMs, right? Where they're going to look at that material, their end of life material and waste battery materials, not actually as a waste, but as a resource. They're going to see, okay, it's getting really scarce out there, trying to get material from mines. We have to control our costs. We're bidding for lithium. We're bidding for nickel. We're trying to get these contracts. We need to supplement, and we need to reduce that reliance. And they're going to want to integrate technology can take the end of life material and convert that into a material that then they can just use back into their manufacturing. And I think that's a long-term strategy. That's in my belief that's the route companies are going to want to go. I think short-term, you can pass off your problem of waste to another company to deal with, like we treat most of our waste now. But I think in the long term, you're going to see, okay, if lithium keeps going up or nickel keeps going up, though, why would we get rid of this material? Why don't we do something with it now? At the end of the day, they own it. Like, I'm talking as the company now, right? Looking at their perspective, they're going to say, well, we own this material. It's so valuable. It's not really a waste. We just need a technology to convert that into something usable. And that's really in the position where we are now, is just building an efficient and strong technology that can be integrated. So we look at more licensing and joint development agreements, not building a massive plant in the middle of America or middle of Europe where all batteries go to be processed.
Okay. When you started talking about having a lot of tailwinds to the whole recycling business, I get that point, but it makes me wonder, you see all these titles in the news. Maybe I see them. Maybe I'm missing the other ones, and you can tell me why. But you see all these titles in the news about Tesla buying or looking at least at buying a mine. You see universities having stakes in miners and stuff like that. It's what I come across. So natural question for me would be, if there's so much tailwinds, how come is smart money not yet going big on recycling? Like, how come does your company have, how come has nobody already front ran your company? Basically, that's what I'm asking.
Well, I mean, that takes, I think we're a globally recognized company, but the process of, let's say, even from our model. So I see right now in the news a lot for current like independent recycling companies. There may be contracts getting supply from different EV companies or battery companies, right? And then you don't know the details of what that looks like. Is it a short-term supply of materials or whatnot, right? But then an integrated approach, it requires a lot of cooperation, where materials are tested. We're also scaling our process, right? We're at the demonstration plant scale, so it requires a lot of that testing of that material, and the product we're producing is a high value and like specifically engineered product, right? That's looking to go directly back. So that's already kind of compressing those many stages of the supply chain I discussed. But now that material needs to be qualified. It's just like a mining operation. You're going to start from grams to kilograms to tons, and then okay, this is going to be a consistent feed of material. And then you need to talk with, you really need full commitment from the top down of the company, working with their R&D team, working with their executive team. And I just think at this stage right now in the industry, an EV company's first priority and a battery company's first priority is to do what they're really good at, and is to produce their product. Right now, I think it's the waste material is still kind of like a afterthought, right? Like the battery companies need to get as much market share right now as possible, and they need to build as many batteries as possible. So all of their capital, they need to focus all of that into making sure that is top priority. Same with the EV companies. Now they may be producing waste along the way, and that's just going to be a cost of business that they're going to need to get rid of, right? And I think that's what we're seeing short term. But I think as the dust settles, you're going to see more strategic thinking, where now groups internally are going to start thinking, okay, well, we have so much waste we're producing. Let's do something with this, dedicating more resources to building on that recycling end of things. And I think that's where it's gonna take time. But fortunately for us, we started really early in 2016 developing this. Building a hydrometallurgical process doesn't happen overnight. We started from the lab to now demonstration. All of this takes engineering work, modeling work, a lot of investment as well. And the team that knows this material, right? Like a battery manufacturer can make the materials, but now the material handling is another level of expertise as well. And that's really where we're focused. And that's just now, cooperating with these teams, collaborating with them on this testing. And then for us as well, I mean, we're getting to that point where we're going to go into commercial development, but we need to do the work at the demonstration plant as well. Companies want to see that real world continuous operating conditions as well. They want to validate that. They want to qualify the materials. All of that is just steps along the way.
What's the biggest? Who's the biggest player in your industry? Like, what's the biggest recycling company right now?
See, it's so it's how's that defined, right? Because I would say when we look at it from a technology perspective, when I look at the environmental impact of our technology and the process efficiency of our technology, that is a whole nother area of hydrometallurgy that we're really focusing on. But then you can have companies out there who are in a totally different business model and using totally different processing techniques. And then maybe on, there's how you define like what they're recycling, because their quoted numbers will be a whole lot different, right? Like there's a point in recycling where you can be mechanically shredding a battery pack or a module, and you're producing like what's called like a black mass, almost like an ore concentrate, but then you still need to process and refine that. And that's when the hydrometallurgy comes. So there's companies on that front end who may be processing thousands of tons of battery packs into black mass. But then we're on this end where we're taking that material and refining it into these high value products. But then we're still both classified as recyclers. So, it's very hard to define or to see like who's at which point right now. I think there's still a lot of dust in the air and it needs to settle. There's not a lot of waste end of life batteries. A lot of the feedstock comes from like production scrap. And then, so yeah, seeing where that direction goes, it's still tough to say.
What are some of the challenges then that you think some of these newcomers to the market might face? Like, I mean, an explorer faces certain challenges, the majority of which are known, not by me, but like if you're technically versed or whatever, you would know the challenges. But so with this, of an explorer, but with this new kid on the block, basically with the recycling companies, what are some of the roadblocks that they like? First of all, newcomers would experience, but also that you are maybe trying to fight against.
Well, yeah, to put in a reference like an explorer, and when they find their deposit, they're dealing with that deposit, and they're trying to find the best way to process that material, right? They're doing their best to make sure that they have an understanding of the ore body and it's not going to change on them. I think from a recycler, especially when you go more the independent recycling route, and now you're getting feedstock material from multiple different sources and the chemistries are different, it's almost like your ore body is constantly changing. You have to characterize what's going in. That's going to change the process chemical consumption, use, how much impurities in those materials. And then it's also making sure that supply is consistent. Unlike an ore body, you're sitting on it, nobody's really taking it away from you. You own that material. But for battery recycling, that's still kind of, where's that going to go? Is that going to be in the hands of the EV companies? Is it going to be hands in the battery companies, or are they going to give it off to another company? And that's going to be an important thing to look out for. So that's why challenges will come from the technology development and the changing feedstock, but integrating technology and collaborating at this point now with, say, like a specific battery manufacturer where your feedstock, and then they know what product is being produced. That allows for more seamless kind of integration. Versus independent, you don't know where you're going to get your supply. You don't know what that supply is going to look like. That may change on you, and you've built maybe a big plant that can't handle that capacity or is too small. So depending on kind of what business model you're going with, it could be very different from mining. And I think a lot, I'll kind of maybe leave it there.
Are you more energy dependent than a mining company is?
I think intuitively somebody can maybe do the, not like a quantitative number, but if you just look at the supply chain of mining, from the energy used in mining to processing that material, to shipping it to different locations for refining, can see that's, can be very energy intensive. When we look at our recycling process, we actually did a life cycle assessment with Minviro. So we do have the preliminary numbers in the final report. We haven't announced those numbers until it's gone through external review. We hope to do so soon. But from the preliminary report, what we have reported is that we are lower in terms of like a global warming potential, like CO2 impact, water scarcity, and these other factors in compared to mining or conventional battery recycling. It just, after external review, we'll share those numbers in more detail.
Sure. Okay, that'd be an interesting one to watch, because going into heavy energy inflation here, that would be, if you're very energy dependent, that might be interesting to watch. Fair enough. So you no, obviously you're bullish on this whole sector, specifically the recycling, and I'll try again to push back just a little bit here, without intending to pick on you or anything. But I'm just trying to figure out myself. So your stock, for example, American Manganese, is down about 50% in the last 52 weeks. And obviously, that's not the only lithium focused, battery metals focused company that's down either. While lithium is up, as you mentioned earlier, 400 or 500% basically over the last year. So I guess also two questions here. If those businesses are that good, how come? How come are they down when the price of the underlying commodity is up? And second of all, if a 400 or 500% move to the upside is not enough to make these stocks move to get buyers excited about these stocks, what would make the market excited about lithium or recycling stocks if a 500% move in the price doesn't? So what do you think?
So I think, yes, we're down from the year, but I think even looking back further, we have to see where we're up from, right? We're still looking at 2-3 year horizon. We were sitting at 15-20 cents for throughout most of our development, pilot plant work, lab scale work, and then along with all the other companies in this space, I think we all saw a nice bump. I think most calling it the Biden bump, and this green focus. We saw a lot of lithium companies. You saw a lot of clean tech companies get quite a large bump in their market cap. And it's what did those companies do with it at that time, right? And what I can say is our price right now, I don't think we're punished on an individual basis as a company. I think we've shown progress throughout our development plan, in getting into demonstration plant work. So I don't think we're being punished on an individual basis and more than on a market basis. But it's more important what companies do with it during those good times. And during those times, we actually did a raise with institutional investors at $1, where we raised 20 million at $1 a share. And from there, we that money, bulk of it is intended for our commercial growth plan. So now, yes, our stock is down, but when you look at what is company is, we're lean. We have a steady burn rate. We have committed funds to the projects right now that we're focusing on that. We're focusing, the recycling, the demonstration plant. So we are committed to that project. We have funds raised, and now going through this market low, we're not in this position. Our backs aren't to the corner where to keep this project going. Now we need to raise at very low prices, or we're desperate for money. I think it's important for investors to look at, okay, does this company have a path forward? Do they have a plan? What's the management team like? What's the future? What's the 5-10 year future of the industry looking like? Because we're obviously seeing shortages, and then I guess determine that for themselves. Yeah, it's never nice to see the price down, but my daily concerns aren't there. I know that my concerns are we make this project happen, like we said we will, and that's we want to move forward, and I think we're well equipped to do that from our patents and financial position. Not that's kind of my view on that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair view. what then do you think needs to happen for you? I was checking it as you spoke. You're at 60 cents now. You're right. You were trading at around 15 to 20 cents for the longest time. And then you had that spike from 20 cents to about $2.22. What do you think is going to, what do you need to happen in the market to make investors excited and increase your stock in value another 3.5 times or something to bring you back to that all-time high? Like, first of all, do you think it's happening? Well, I guess three questions. Do you think it's happening? What's going to make it happen? What is the timeline? Like, what is the timeline from an investor standpoint? Like, is this, am I looking to lock up my money for 5 years, for 10 years? What would you hope for?
Um, I think, I mean, I guess I can't really tell investors what to do, but my views on it is that, even for this year, it felt like anything you really did, good news or bad news, the market just kept going down. It wasn't there wasn't much positivity in anybody's minds, right? Everybody was kind of pulling out, sitting in cash. But I think as a company, some of the big catalysts I see is the work going on with our demonstration plant. So as we provide progress updates there, we are working with collaborators. So as we hope to announce more binding and defined partnerships with companies. I think those are some major catalysts now that I would at least expect to see at the scale we are now, because I think a lot of companies, yes, we're doing work in the lab scale and the pilot scale, and then say, okay, give us a call when you're actually built out to something larger, maybe like a demonstration plant. So I think now at this stage where the demonstration plant is further de-risking the operation, companies are getting more serious about recycling, getting more comfortable with the idea. Okay, like we've seen this process, we see it's real, you've tested our products. That's where I think we can look to lock in more strategic partners and have then a more defined timeline on how big of a commercial plant, where that will be, who will be with, where will we integrate maybe our first commercial plant. So those are some of the catalysts or milestones that I'm working towards, or our management team is working towards.
So that's what your end game is going to depend on, right? Because I wanted to ask, what is the end game for recycling companies? Like, what does the world of recycling look like in 20 years? Or can we even look that far?
Well, I think recycling will be inevitable, right? But in just terms of, you already have battery waste. You're going to need to deal with it. You need to get these materials out, right? It's just what technology you're using, what kind of business model. Some recycling companies, your milestones, maybe have they built out their commercial plant, or do they have offtake agreements? Do they have feedstock source, right? As like an independent recycler. And maybe those are what some investors are looking at. For us, I think maybe things can happen. It may seem like, okay, falling behind. But if, let's say, then we have a licensing agreement or joint development agreement with a major battery manufacturer, and we say, okay, we're going to build our first commercial plant alongside a major battery manufacturer, then that changes the narrative right there. Now we have, industry support. We have a target for a commercial plant, but it's important first to prove out at this scale. The demonstration plant, like in the name, is to demonstrate that process to companies interested to look at the materials we're processing, the efficiency of that process, what kind of products we're producing out of there, like the quality of the products, and saying, okay, you know what, this is the real deal. We're interested, and we want to scale up from there. So it changes for recycling companies. I mean, the outlook can be very different for many companies. There's not many publicly traded recycling companies, but you're definitely seeing a lot of interest in the topic.
Fair enough. I think I have a way better understanding of what's going on in these markets right now, and should be interesting to watch. So I'll put a pin in it for now, and I'll keep watching it. And I guess I'll let you go now. Before I let you go, though, was there something that you had hoped we talk about, but I forgot to bring up?
No, I think we covered a lot. I mean, at the end of the day, like you say in your disclaimer, I recommend everybody does their due diligence and studies the markets, and technologies. I think there's a lot of finer details in understanding the technology and making an informed decision.
Yeah, I think that's a thing that might be an investment in the education and information there, because if this is something that is really going to be a big part of our future, then you might want to go into it knowing a lot more, knowing that this is not just some timely knowledge that you're going to use over the next 2 or 3 years. This is knowledge that you might use for your investments in the coming 20 or whatever years. So I think that's sound advice. Yeah, Zarko, thank you for investing your time in me, and I'd say good luck on your endeavors.
Thank you so much.